Hello, it's May 16th and this is the New Arab Weekly podcast from the New Arab in London. Each week we take a look at the biggest stories from the week and ask what happened and what does it all mean. Joining us to unpack the last 7 days in the Middle East, we have journalist and reporter Oliver Mitzi.
Hey.
And journalist and reporter Asiya Hamed.
Hi.
We gaze long into the abyss, and in the abyss we see the news. On with the show. I have our first story for this week. While Gaza is understandably taking up a lot of the world's attention, fighting in Sudan has also been intensifying. This week, the RSF launched an assault in Darfur, sparking fears of mass casualties and a further worsening humanitarian crisis. The World Food Programme's Deputy Executive Director said this on March 14th.
We need more attention to the situation in Sudan. Under any other circumstances, this would be at the top of the world agenda, and it's not. And we want to contribute to raise attention and to mobilize more resources for our response.
So what exactly has been happening in Sudan?
Fighting has now been happening in Sudan for about a year. It was around April time of 2023. The forces of the government and the Rapid Support Forces started fighting. This has now intensified around the Darfur region. In mid-April of this year, the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, encircled the key city of El Fasher, which is a key town in Darfur. Fighting has now broken out between the government forces and the RSF. The UN said on Sunday that 27 people had been killed in one day. There's been reports of airstrikes, artillery fire, machine gun clashes. That's been happening since Friday. There's pretty much a near total communications blackout in the city. On Saturday, it was reported that Sudan's government military and allied armed groups there had managed to stave off an attack by the RSF, who are a paramilitary organisation, and other Arab militias. The sort of importance of El Fasher as a town and as a city in Darfur, this is now the last sort of major area where the government are still in control. Across the rest of Darfur as a region, the RSF, these Rapid Support Forces, are in complete control everywhere else. So this is the last holdout of the government in Darfur. There's been a lot of fires we've had recently. There was a report that came out this week from investigators from Sudan Witness, which is an open source project run by the non-profit Centre for Information Resilience. They said that fires resulting from fighting in Sudan, this is across Sudan, destroyed or damaged 72 villages and settlements just last month. In its analysis, they said that 31 settlements, villages and towns were affected by fire in April with a destruction rate of over 50%.
Okay, so who are the parties fighting?
So there are two sides of this, right? You've got the government forces fighting and, as I said, these rapid support forces. The government forces are led by the country's de facto leader, a charming man named Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. And then on the other side, you have this paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, who are commanded by Burhan's former deputy, a man called Mohammed Hamdan Dalgo, who often goes by the name of Hamati. So far, between the two of these, the fighting has been pretty intense between these two sides. So far, the violence has killed over 15,000 people now across Sudan. Internally, there's over 6.7 million people have been displaced. 1.8 million have been forced to flee the country. With this fighting between the two of them, had groups like Human Rights Watch, who have warned of ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, and genocide against the country's black African mass elite population. I mean, there have been some really horrific stories that have come out of Sudan of late over this fighting. There was one 17-year-old boy who was interviewed who said that he had seen RSF forces killing 12 children and 5 adults from several different families. He said, quote, "They piled up the children and shot them. They threw their bodies into the river and their belongings in after them."
So who are the rapid support forces?
So as I said, they're commanded by this man Hamati. These are a paramilitary group within Sudan. Formerly, they were sort of not inherently part of the Sudanese army. They were parallel to the Sudanese army, but they did work with the Sudanese army. This goes back even to the times of Omar al-Bashir, who was the former sort of dictator of Sudan before he was ousted. They have a pretty strong alignment with Russia, but probably more notably, they get most of their support from the UAE, right? Hamati, he has visited the UAE on a number of occasions. He's met with the president of the UAE, Mohammed bin Zayed. He did that in March 2003, which was just a month before fighting between the RSF and the government broke out. Hamati's commercial operations are headquartered in Dubai, so they are very sort of closely linked. Abu Dhabi reportedly has a military base which is established in neighbouring Chad, which is apparently supplying military support to Hamati. The UAE has denied this because they would, although the UN has deemed this to be pretty credible.
Why exactly does the UAE support Hamati?
For the UAE, Sudan plays a pretty key role in their sort of commercial networks. This also includes Libya, Chad, Uganda, Ethiopia, Somaliland, but Sudan is a key player. The idea is that the UAE is using Hamati in particular to safeguard the gold mines that exist in Sudan and that the UAE has a keen interest in and has invested in. Russia is also tied to mining operations in Sudan. Again, this is why they are supporting Hamati. They generally have like an Africa policy as well. They've also been allowed to fill that space because the West has retreated so much from Africa. The US, the UK, the Europe are no longer involved in Sudan like they used to be in the past. No, let's say for better or for worse. I mean, their history is not good there, but they have their withdrawals certainly open the door to the likes of Russia and also China, who will play a slightly less of a role in Sudan but are in Africa. But Russia, China, and the UAE have moved into the space created by the West leaving.
So why are they fighting, and what exactly is happening in this war of Sudan, considering the severity of the conflict?
I mean, control is an age-old sort of thing. They are fighting for control. To sort of as sort of context and a bit of history, Burhan took over power from a civilian-led government that was initially set up after popular protests deposed and got rid of Omar al-Bashir, which was a great moment for Sudan. I mean, he wasn't a nice guy, and a civilian-led government was a really good thing for Sudan. It's what the Sudanese people wanted. In a sort of history repeating itself, the military then took over again. At that point, Burhan sought to incorporate the RSF into the official Sudanese army. Right? This would obviously then sideline Hamati, which he didn't like. I think the Hamati sort of reducing the independence of the RSF, who also have their own business interests, which they didn't want to lose. They make a huge amount of money, and they didn't want to lose their independence from that money-making stuff. There's also a question of accountability here. Both the Sudanese army and the RSF have both in the past 12 months and during the time of Burhan and the last, major conflict we had in Darfur, we had the genocide there before, unfortunately, they've committed appalling crimes there. And there is perhaps a sense that it was feared by the likes of Hamati and the RSF that Burhan would essentially hand over them and say you can have criminal accountability for their actions if it protects Burhan. And I think that's essentially it was a big problem for the RSF, who don't want to be held, criminally accountable for genocide, ethnic cleansing, things like that.
And given the severity of the fighting, what is the aid situation like in the country?
Yeah, bad, really, really bad. The El Fasher, which is the town that's seeing this fighting currently happening, is a humanitarian hub for many UN agencies and sort of a variety of aid operations in the Darfur region. The UN's humanitarian coordinator for the country on Wednesday, he warned that the residents of Sudan are, quote, trapped in an inferno of brutal violence, adding that there was increasingly a risk of famine due to the rainy season and the fact that a lot of aid has been blocked. On April 3rd, over a dozen UN trucks that were loaded with medical equipment and food left Port Sudan and have still not reached El Fasher, which they say is, quote, due to insecurity and delays in getting clearance at checkpoints. I mean, it's much the same as we're seeing in Gaza. Violence is stopping any aid going in, but that was on April 3rd that they left Port Sudan, and they're still not there. They just cannot get the aid to the people. So there's a real risk of famine. There's a real risk of, the spread of disease, people not being able to get treated properly either as well. Hospitals we've seen have been hit over the past week as well.
Because we've seen also with alarming rates of even sexual violence against, Sudanese women and girls, and looking at the fact that, it's still being regarded as the world's, biggest displacement crisis. Yeah. I wanted to also ask you, what's been the international response regarding recently with what's been unfolding with the attacks in Darfur?
Well, to editorialize slightly, appalling. I mean, really terrible. I think the international response. Yeah, but before this kicked off in El Fasher, the US said, they called on all armed forces in Sudan to cease attacks immediately. On Wednesday, they imposed sanctions on 2 commanders from the RSF, freezing any assets that they might have and criminalizing transactions with them. But, really, we've heard close to nothing from the international community. I mean, not nearly what we should be hearing from the international community at all. When it comes down to this conflict, really the world should be up in arms about what's happening in Sudan, and they're not. Aid agencies have raised the alarm. I think there is a real sense of global fatigue with everything that's happening in Gaza, where, I think for the general population and governments, they cannot cope with more than one thing at a time, it would seem. And so, unfortunately, Sudan really seems to have been forgotten about, quite sadly. I would say, there's a real tragedy, I think, with Sudan, that you have these conflicts that are between two sides, as you always do. There is a third side to this, which has been from the very beginning, which is on the third side is the Sudanese people, who do not want military control. They have never wanted military control. They protested against military control when Burhan's forces took over, incredibly bravely, and for months and months facing down the army. They were incredibly brave about it. Now they find themselves essentially trapped between 2 forces who have no interest for what they want, are only out looking for themselves. And sadly, the international community is doing very little to step up and do and provide the support that it should be.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant have entered a public spat over a lack of post-war plan for the Gaza Strip. During a press conference on Wednesday, Gallant said, I repeat and make it clear, I will not agree to the establishment of an Israeli military administration in Gaza. Israel must not have civilian control over the Gaza Strip. This is quite significant, and these comments come amid a lack of concrete post-war plan from Netanyahu's administration over what happens following the defeat of Hamas and the end of the war.
What was Netanyahu's response? It seems like tough words. So
He hasn't actually responded just as yet. However, his colleague, Benny Gantz, has actually thrown his weight in support of Yoav Gallant's comments, which is quite interesting. Within the Israeli cabinet, there is a split between what one could say Yoav Gallant and Benny Gantz on one side, and other more far-right members of the coalition government.
Benny Gantz he's in the cabinet. He's also in opposition.
Well, yes, Benny Gantz is in opposition. He's a member of the opposition. However, he joined the war cabinet at the outset of the war in October, and in order to form what could be described as a unity government, in order to provide a united front for the Israeli government to pursue its war goals in Gaza.
As Gallant mentioned, I mean, a lot of this disagreement seems to be centred around sort of the day after in Gaza. What are, let's say, the leading plans for the day after in Gaza?
Well, a number of plans or theories or speculative suggestions have been put forward by many different participants in the war. Actually, Gallant said that he proposed that an alternative Palestinian administration should rule the Gaza Strip. And he actually said that he had proposed this to the cabinet, but he hasn't really got a response, which is quite notable. Now,
would that be the Palestinian Authority or something different?
There could be a number of things. A lot of things have been thrown out there. Be that the Palestinian Authority. Earlier in the war, the US really pushed for the Palestinian Authority to take an administrative role in Gaza. There has been floated around that Gaza's tribes take over the administrative functions within the Strip as well. Netanyahu himself has refused to agree to the Palestinian Authority being involved. Time and time again, he has basically said no. We don't want this to happen.
He calls them like a terrorist government or something like that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Something incredibly diplomatic from. Yeah.
He may say that, but it's better than what Foreign Minister, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir proposed a couple of days ago. He actually called for the voluntary immigration of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip out of the Gaza Strip.
Quote unquote voluntary.
Yeah, quote unquote voluntary.
Voluntary at the barrel of a gun.
Immigration.
How surprising.
Yeah.
He said this at an ultra-nationalist rally in Sderot. And he also called for the resettling of the Gaza Strip.
Yep.
The United States recently has been talking with Arab countries about having Arab peacekeepers provide security in Gaza following the end of the war. According to Financial Times, Egypt, the UAE and Morocco are considering the initiative. But that's only on the basis that the US recognizes Palestinian statehood. And obviously we know at the UN, the United States have voted against recognizing Palestinian as, or elevating them to full member status at the General Assembly earlier.
Gaza's relentlessly busy, so there's one other story that came out this week regarding the death toll in Gaza and the UN's comments on the death toll in Gaza. What did they say?
Yeah, so the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs came out with figures breaking down the number of people that had been killed in the Gaza Strip. So their figures show that 24,686 had been killed, where 7,797 of whom were children, and 4,959 of them being women. The publication of these statistics actually drew a lot of reaction internationally, with a lot of people who hold pro-Israeli sentiment, such as U.S. members of Congress or Israeli public figures and members of the government, actually said, "Wow, okay, so we shouldn't really be trusting the statistics of the Ministry of Health of Gaza, who they say are Hamas run." And yeah, basically, the UN has been lying about the statistics.
You mentioned sort of the Ministry of Health. It's often referred to as the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. I mean, what is that about? And is it accurate to say that? Do we think?
Well, Hamas is the governing body, or makes up the governing body in Gaza. But I think we need to remember that civil servants exist, and that they may have a membership with Hamas, but they're not part of their armed wing. I mean, I would honestly, I think the best way to look at it is like the Ba'athist government in Iraq.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good comparison. Ba'athist teachers or doctors and teachers who are part of the civil service and the structures of government, having Ba'athist membership in order to be part of those structures, but not actually being like active members of the Ba'ath Party.
Yeah.
That's the sort of comparison I would make, at least tentatively. And the UN and the UN has also come out and defended these figures and also given further explanations. Basically, they didn't revise the death toll down. What happened was these were the amount of people that were identified, as in not that they basically they have 35,000 people and the bodies of 35,000 people that have been killed.
Yeah.
25,000 of whom have been identified.
Right.
And that's where the quote-unquote revision has come down. But even though those 10,000 bodies have yet to be identified and yet to be placed into categories, that process is ongoing. So they do exist.
Yeah. They're not denying their existence.
They're not denying their existence. It's just a matter of identifying them. And it is a long process, especially given how.
It's a difficult situation to be going around
and 10,000 have yet to be unidentified as far as what the UN and the Health Ministry have said as well. Yeah,
a body that has been killed in an airstrike is going to be hard to identify.
Yeah,
I don't want to go into sort of graphic details about it, but it's easy to imagine that that's the case.
It did seem odd. I thought, because with this sort of argument about the death toll and how accurate numbers are has been going on for a while, for a few months now, sort of rumbling on the background. But I remember from previous sort of Israeli attacks when we've had maybe a couple of weeks of conflict in Gaza or even a few days, and the numbers have been sort of in the maybe 1,500 or so, or some of this, and the Ministry of Health has come out and said, from those 2 weeks, let's say 1,800 people were killed, and then the Israelis have come out and go, no, it was more like 200. And then the UN has come out and said, actually, we went and we did our counting, and it wasn't 1,800, it was 1,700 or something like that. The UN and the Health Ministry throughout all these conflicts have always been pretty close to each other, and the Israelis have been the outlier, saying something well below the figure reported by those two. So I never quite understood why there was such a big hoo-ha this time. Like, they've been proven pretty time and time again to be accurate, or certainly a lot more accurate than the Israelis ever reported.
Yeah. Well, the UN, in their clarification, also added that the health ministry statistics in previous conflicts have, quote, proven to be generally accurate, end quote. And if that's not reaffirming their confidence in the current count, then I'm not too sure what is.
Yeah. Sticking with the UN, they had some tragedy on their side. A member of staff was killed in Rafah. What happened? What did the UN say about it? What's anyone else said about it?
So a UN security staffer was killed in his car, and another passenger in the car who's also a UN staffer was wounded.
So these are, you should say, these are foreign workers. They're not Palestinian.
No.
Yeah.
The person that was killed is actually an Indian national. And they were killed he was killed in a UN car that was attacked by a tank. Now, the UN has said that it had informed the Israeli authorities of the movements of the vehicle, as it was targeted and then hit, and that it also said that it was saddened by the loss of the worker Colonel Waibhay Kale, an Indian national, as I've previously said. They've also said that it was a clearly marked vehicle as well, and that this reaffirmed that there's nowhere is safe in the Gaza Strip. Yeah. And he has called for an investigation as well.
Rafah's obviously still going on in a pretty terrible way. But attacks this week continued also in the north, in Jabalia. Ollie, just to sort of catch us up to speed there.
So the Israelis re-entered Jabalia refugee camp in order to... Hamas has been regrouping within northern Gaza, and they've been doing so for some time, so they've decided to go back into the camp. And it's just part of this cycle of violence and destruction that is almost seeming to be perpetual now. And, in the context of what we were previously discussing around the lack of post-war plan, the fact that they're going back into the camp is emblematic of that. Hamas has vowed to continue on an insurgency, and it's looking like they're going to be able to do it pretty well. So unless there's a post-war plan, they're going to have to go into Jabalia and any other place that they've previously been into in the Gaza Strip, which is pretty much everywhere bar Rafah, which is an ongoing process at the moment.
So that's not a great testament to the Israeli, capabilities to actually go after Hamas if they're having to re-enter places like that in the north, which they're flattened, but yet Hamas claim that Hamas still have capabilities there.
That, or it proves the resilience of Hamas as a fighting force within the Gaza Strip. Western countries have conducted counterinsurgency operations and campaigns, and we, the UK and the United States knows how difficult it can be to successfully achieve those outcomes. Look at what happened in Afghanistan
and Iraq,
Iraq as well. The difficulties of that as well. It's going to be very difficult for the Israelis to successfully conduct and effectively destroy Hamas, both as a political organization and as a military force in Gaza. So unless there's a post-war plan, then they're going to have to keep going back into the Gaza Strip again and again and again.
Finally, Asya, what have you got?
All right, so we are going to be speaking a little bit about Kuwait. So what's happened over the past week? We have the Emir, Sheikh Mish'al, who's dissolved parliament for up to 4 years, and a move that many analysts are fearing that it might threaten the country's very unique semi-democratic political system. And this has only occurred only a month, so to be exact, a month and a few days since members were elected in the early elections held back in April. So... And also to add on, so while Kuwait did choose a new parliament during elections, its members hadn't even begun their new session since getting elected, And speaking of suspensions, this has only happened twice before in the country's history. So this happened in 1976 and 1986. And so what this means regarding these suspensions, what this entails, this means that the power of the National Assembly will now be assumed by the Emir himself, Sheikh Mish'al, and the country's cabinet, according to state TV. So so what exactly also was being said with regards to the suspensions is that Sheikh Mish'al stated that the National Assembly, as well as several other articles of the Constitution, will be axed in order to review the, to put in air quotations, democratic process, potentially until 2028. And this includes the most controversial aspect of the suspension, which includes, particularly those covering the parliament. This is the suspension for a period of no more than 4 years, while Kuwait's political process would be reviewed and amended, essentially.
Now, myself, like I suspect many of our listeners, are not fully up to speed with Kuwaiti politics.
Yes.
Asya, what was the political system in operation in Kuwait?
Okay, so generally, Kuwait is, for people that aren't familiar with Kuwaiti politics, so it's its constitutional emirate ruled by the Sabah family, and its current emir is Sheikh Mish'al. As you know, some people might know, Kuwait is the only elected parliament in the Gulf region. Mm-hmm. And so you have its ruling emir that appoints a cabinet, and that's traditionally dominated by members of the ruling family that decides key political decisions. However, while the monarchy does hold, executive power, and does dominate most state institutions, there is the elected National Assembly that does play an influential role, that has challenged the government, as we've seen throughout the years. And we've seen that through friction between lawmakers and the executive, government reshuffles, snap parliamentary elections that have been frequent since 2011. So its 50-seat, National Assembly does wield some influence, but that's obviously debatable now considering the current suspension.
So Parliament's suspended, Constitution suspended.
Yep.
Why?
So why? So I'm going to read to you a quote by Sheikh Mish'al himself.
Ooh, please do.
So he said, I won't do his accent and voice. I'm bad. So he said, the recent turmoil in the Kuwaiti political scene has reached a stage where we cannot remain silent. So we must take all necessary measures to achieve the best interests of the country and its people. I will not allow by any means that democracy will be exploited to destroy the state.
What does that mean?
So he's essentially said that, the sweeping measures have been necessary due to the unhealthy, to put in quotes, the unhealthy atmosphere in Kuwait that has led to the proliferation of corruption in state institutions. But that obviously a lot of people can argue that, that's just to mystify in terms of the fact that this is Kuwait potentially turning more autocratic.
Yeah.
And this also does follow many years of political deadlock with frequent disputes between the National Assembly, which has been dissolved several times, and the government. But, analysts do believe that the political gridlock has left Kuwait behind wealthier neighbors. So that, could be a reason behind the move. People have rightly they have noted that, Kuwait's lagging pace of reform and development, especially comparing to, for example, the dramatic, pace of change in Saudi Arabia. We see that with Vision 2030. So, another reason for the move could also, denote, Emir Mish'al's character and his need to appoint a crown prince and successors.
Which he hasn't done yet.
He hasn't done
yet. I think the Parliament does play a role in approving that, the Crown Prince.
Yes,
right.
But with him now having full control, this could mean that he has more, power in being able to choose, who he would appoint.
He's in his 80s or something, right?
Yeah.
So a Crown Prince is needed quite urgently.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, because even when Sheikh Yoav was alive, he was the oldest, crown prince, in the world at that time. So I think, his old age does, play a significant role in this.
No one lives forever.
Yeah. And, there have been also other arguments regarding the suspective move, that the suspension is just sort of maybe, a transition into, maybe moving towards, having more of an autocratic, state system, and these systematic, crackdowns are notable in other neighboring Gulf regions, as we know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said that this process, the parliament would be, I guess wouldn't exist for up to 4 years. The normal political, the way of doing politics in Kuwait will be suspended for about 4 years. What is the process now?
So with now the complete indefinite suspension of the National Assembly. So the Emir did announce via the royal decree that Kuwait will be forming a new cabinet that's headed by the Emir's nephew, Sheikh Ahmed.
Nothing suspicious about that.
No, nothing suspicious at all. Just family get-togethers. So he was previously appointed as prime minister in April, and then you have you have other members who retain their positions as finance and foreign ministers. You have Anwar Ali al-Mudhif. You have Abdullah Ali al-Yahya. So they've retained their positions as finance and foreign ministers. That's also according to decree from Amir Sheikh Mash'al. So now we've got a new formation of government since this announcement.
What have Kuwaitis been saying about this? I mean, you mentioned that some people have said, well, maybe this actually was needed. Others have said no, it wasn't. But what about Kuwaitis? What do they reckon about this?
Yeah, there's been a mixed bag of opinions, especially regarding what Kuwaitis have felt. Publicly, activists and critics have been unusually quiet. Also something to really emphasize here. And, maybe there's also because of, the fears that, they're just trying to exercise caution, of any, harsh suppression of public dissent. So there has been some, abnormal, silence following this, but there has been, varying opinions, especially by analysts who do say that there have been some Kuwaitis that welcome this move, especially given the fact that there's been so much political turmoil, especially in modern Kuwaiti politics. So they just feel that if they have to sacrifice the democratic norms, so be it. Just for there to be some kind of, so there's that argument. But then on the other hand, there's fears that it is going to lead to a crackdown on dissent and political opposition. And as Kuwaiti has been known as the only semi-democratic region in the Gulf, this is obviously going to prompt some fears. So there's a mixed reactions, but yeah, it could be a thing where people are feeling like this step is long overdue, despite how controversial it is.
You mentioned a semi-democratic country, only semi-democratic country in the region.
Yeah.
How democratic was Kuwait? I mean, is that coming to an end now?
Yeah, this is a thing in terms of, and I think it leads back to, what global experts have been saying, in terms of whether this is a cause of concern, because whether it was a democracy to begin with is also there's two ways to look at it, because if you think about up until the suspension of Kuwait's parliament being suspended, it's always been described by long-term observers as so-called an oasis of democracy. It's a liberal outlier, compared to like other autocratic Gulf states. We already know who. We don't need to. So if you look at, for example, Freedom House's rankings, Kuwait and Lebanon have always been seen as the countries in the Middle East, classified as partly free. Partly free in the organization's annual assessment of political rights, but overall, whether there's concerns about whether democracy is coming to an end, whether there was the democracy, it's really hard to tell. It might be a bit of a vague answer, but it might be hard because we have seen this before. Because as some experts have argued, it's a classic case of democratic backsliding. Because if some people might recall, back in 76 and 86, it's happened again. Kuwait's royal rulers dissolved parliament, but the parliament did eventually return, as did Kuwait's constitution. So it's, why people debate whether it's just the Kuwait model. That's just, inevitably there is going to be some form of democracy that will return. So it's really depending on whether how time will tell, and what would Sheikh Mash'al's next approaches be, and if democracy will fully return for Kuwait. It really just depends on what are his next steps, because we've seen this before.
Well, Kuwait is an outlier in that part of the world, and I think we can all hope that in some form it does stick around. Few other stories from the week. This one, UN General Assembly asks Security Council to reconsider Palestine membership. The UN General Assembly voted by a wide margin on Friday to grant Palestine new rights and privileges and called on the Security Council to favourably reconsider its request to become the 194th member of the United Nations. Do we think this could perhaps be one of the sort of better chances for Palestinian membership at the UN? Seems like it could be a bit of a goer, no?
Well, it certainly shows how much support there is internationally for Palestinian statehood. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, when it comes to the Security Council, it falls on the US to accept such a proposition, and also practically on the ground, it relies on the willingness of the Israeli government to end the occupation of the West Bank. And is that ever going to happen? Even if the US pushes for UN pushes for it.
I mean, I think we can hope that the US will see the sort of change on the ground at the General Assembly. Maybe they will act on it. Another one here: BBC won't refer to Hamas as terrorists after Cameron call. The British public broadcaster said Monday it will only use the word terrorist when quoting official sources in order to maintain its duty of objective reporting. Do we think this is a good thing? They had their call with Lord Cameron.
Lord.
Yeah, of Foreign Secretary for the British government. Do we think this is a good thing?
I feel like the use of the word terrorist, for me, as a Muslim, hearing that word, even just you reading that out loud, has always been a loaded term. And I feel like, it's been specifically very over-racialized. So, the argument for me is still confusing, because I feel like, the term is very much subjective, not rather a term that you would use objectively. So I feel like for the BBC to have this pressure to implement using words like terrorist, I feel that, it's because it poses the question of, what makes a terrorist, I think there's an element of objectivity that comes with the use of that. And I think heavy, over-racialization of this term that we've seen with what the terrorists are, what typically they look like. So this is just another example with, the BBC getting pressure on referring Hamas as, terrorists, saying that they're a political and military organization. But,
last one here. Iran lawmakers back switch to Friday-Saturday weekend. Iran's parliament approved changes to the working week for all government employees. This was on Wednesday. They would establish a 40-hour working week with a Friday-Saturday weekend. Does this make any sense, do we think?
It seems like a good thing for Iranian government workers, given that they only had a day and a half weekend and a 44-hour week. So
before they had a 44-hour working week with a half-day Thursday and Friday. Half-day Thursday and then Friday off. So, it does seem good for them, no? Right?
Yeah.
Economists, this is in the article, economists have warned that the alternative of a Thursday-Friday weekend risked deepening Iran's isolation by limiting most international transactions to 3 days per week.
And that's why some Gulf states actually moved to the Monday-Friday work week as well, right?
It does make sense, I think. It does go on here. But some clerics accuse supporters of a Friday-Saturday weekend of taking their lead from the Judeo-Christian traditions of the Western world. So it was good they had their say. Some great stuff on the New Arab's website this week. And Asya, what have you got?
Yeah, so my story of the day is an opinion piece by Imad Musa. He wrote a really timely article considering the fact that it's been, 75 years since the first Nakba. And his story titled Nakba Yesterday, Nakba Today, the story of my grandmother's two keys, is a highly recommended piece, just following his own personal journey, witnessing two Nakbas through his grandmother's eyes. And I think it was just amazing storytelling and just so important considering what's been unfolding now and what needs to be discussed generally. It's a great piece.
It's a good piece, that. I've got one from Opinions as well, from Benjamin Fev. With €1 billion bribe, the EU is rewarding Lebanon's bad behaviour. This is an opinion piece about the $1 billion in financial aid that the European Union announced for Lebanon. Benjamin argues that this will only support Lebanon's kleptocratic political class and reward their bad behaviour. Ollie.
So my piece of this week is from the analysis desk, titled "How Israel is Defying Biden's Red Line on Rafah." It's by Giorgio Cafiero, and basically it looks at the position that the US finds itself in regarding Israel's operation in Rafah, and the sort of balancing act that the Biden administration has to take internationally, but also regarding its own domestic situation, and how Israel is taking advantage of that and assessing the implications of that.
All great stuff. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the New Arab Weekly. This week we were joined by Oliver Mitzi and Asya Hamad. We'll be back next Friday and every Friday after that. You can subscribe to the New Arab Weekly on Apple, Spotify and wherever else you get your podcasts and be notified for when a new episode drops. You can also rate and review, which helps us spread the word. Until then, if you have any questions for us or stories that you would like us to cover, drop us an email, podcast@newarab.com, or find us on social media @TNA Podcasts. Don't forget to follow the New Arab on Facebook, X and Instagram for all the latest news, analysis and opinion from the region.